Hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff and I'm joined by my friends Jared Nelson and Scott Edberg, and we are glad to be back with you. I was just thinking about it. Some of you who are listening may not realize it, but the PCA has a directory for worship in the back of our Book of Church Order. Who knew? We're trying to spread the word and let people know where it is, that they should read it and take advantage of it. And so in light of that, as we approach our time in the BCO in the latter part of it, coming up in early 2026, we are spending some time talking to other people who have actual directories for worship, who actually make use of them and practice them. And so we have a guest today who is going to discuss with us the OPC directory and other related topics. But all that is to say, we're glad you're with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Jared again because these interviews are kind of his idea, and we like the way he does it. So, Jared, take it away, bro.
All right. Well, we have with us Jonathan Cruse. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you're at right now?
You mean like on this podcast?
Sure. Yes, that's exactly what
bad decisions did you make to get here?
Yeah, I was like, because there's a gun pointed at my head. That I'm a pastor in the Presbytery of Michigan, Ontario, for the OPC. So we have basically all of Michigan and all of Canada, because there aren't any OP churches outside of Ontario. It's a big presbytery, geographically speaking. And so I've been in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is just south of Grand Rapids, like the next big city south of Grand Rapids, about 40 minutes away. So close to Reform Mecca there, and good bookstores like Baker and RHB. I am married to Carrie Ann. She's a Philly native. We met while I was in college in Philly, going to Temple University, and we met at church at 10th Presbyterian, and so I have a fond affection for the PCA, and we both do, of course. So when we got married, that was right around when I sensed a call to ministry. We moved to California, where I went to Westminster Seminary, California, and then we've been in. We were there for 3 years, and we've been in Kalamazoo ever since. And now we have Jacob, Evangeline, and Caleb now with us too. So that's us in a nutshell.
Yes. And
I should add that I have two siblings. I don't have favorites, but Jared does, because my sister is a member of his church, and one of his ruling elders is my brother-in-law.
Yes. Well, shout out to them, I suppose. If they ever listen
I guess we figured out how you wound up on the podcast.
Yeah.
That's how you got here.
Well, actually, the first time that I heard about you was when I was given one of your books. And actually, I bought a copy, and then like a week later at Twin Lakes, they gave us a copy of your book on worship, What Happens When We Worship.
Isn't that the worst thing in the world?
Well, what's funny is I was reading it on my way back from Twin Lakes, and I accidentally left it in the airport. So somebody in Atlanta has my copy, or it's in the trash or something. I don't know. So that's my other copy.
Can we go with this story that there's just some passerby picked it up?
Yes, we'll go with that.
Was brought to faith in the Lord and has now entered a Reformed church in the Georgia area, and that it's all because of your negligence in taking your book. Let's go with that version.
That's our fan fiction story there.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
Well, that's part of what connects you to worship in our minds, but also we've been asking some other people and some other Reformed denominations to talk about their directory, because we're about to go through chapter by chapter our directory for worship. And in fact, there's a committee right now that is editing the PCA directory for worship and trying to get it ready to submit to us. And so this is maybe just content for them to say what's good about some other people's books. Mm-hmm. But we talked to Dr. Mark Ross of the ARP about their recent edit in the past 20 years. That's pretty recent in Presbyterian years. But maybe we could just start with your book on worship, because you wrote a book on it. Starting with a little bit of your premise. You start with saying that worship is important, and maybe it relates to the title. Why is it important, and is it because of what happens to us when we worship?
Yeah, right. The title, What Happens When We Worship. And the short answer, the non-15 chapter long answer is we meet with God. And there is no greater privilege in all the world than to stand in the blessed presence of the Lord unafraid. We're welcomed into God's presence. It can be a terrifying thing to meet God if we're on bad terms with us. But in worship, through the merits and mediation of Jesus Christ, we're welcomed in, and we can come with our heads held high and with a smile on our face that we're meeting not just the maker of the universe, but our Redeemer and our friend and our Father. And worship, I argue, is not just important, but it's the most important thing that we'll ever do. And that's at least for two reasons. The one is the fact that we were made to worship, that being image bearers of God, we're meant to glorify God in all that we think, say, and do, and that we see that God puts Adam and Eve in this garden for the sake of living in blissful and blessed communion with Him. That's the point of our existence, is to behold God and to exalt Him, honor Him, glorify Him, in a word, worship Him. So we're made to do that. And I use my dog as an illustration. He's an Australian Shepherd, Obadiah, and he spends a lot of his time, laying on the couch or at the foot of the bed, just kind of doing what dogs do. But when our kids go outside and they're playing in the yard, you see something kind of switches for him, and he starts running around them and kind of, he doesn't bite them, but he kind of, snaps at their heels a little bit to get them going in a certain direction. He starts hurting them. It's just his instinct. He's a shepherd. And that's when you see Obi is at his happiest, when he's doing what he was designed to do. And that's why worship is so important. It's the thing we were designed to do. Paul talks about that in Romans 1, that unrighteous men will suppress the truth about God, but the one thing that they can't suppress is the impulse to worship. So they're going to worship something. They'll worship the creature rather than the creator, but they're still going to worship, because why? They were made to worship, but they'll be happiest. We all are happiest when we worship the only one who is worthy of worship. It's the most important thing that we do because of that, but also because it's not just what we're made to do, but what we're remade to do. Not just what we're designed to do, but what we're redeemed to do, what we're saved to do. In John, right, Jesus says to the Samaritan woman at the well that the Father is seeking worshipers. Jesus is on a rescue mission to find worshipers for the Lord, and that's what we're all redeemed for, rescued for, that we would be assembled before the throne in heaven and cry glory. And so I can't think of anything more important in life than to do the thing I was designed initially to do, and the thing that Christ died to enable me to do properly again. So that's why worship is so important.
Yeah, I appreciated a few different things about your approach. One was chapter 9, you get into that quote from the Second Helvetic: the preaching of the Word of God is the Word of God. The fact that God is speaking to us. I think Hughes Oliphant Old called it the charismatic presence, that, God is present almost in such a way, like as we think of the sacraments, communion with God there. And then something that I had encountered only when I came into a Reformed church was this idea that worship is shaping us, that it's changing us. And so if we think about, well, in the church, we need to do a lot of stuff and we worship, but then we do these other important things like discipleship and things like that. Well, no, you're actually being shaped and discipled in the midst of the worship. And so I guess my question then, coming back to that, is in your OPC context, did you have any kind of surprises or anything that you found interesting that was different going from, you'd done some worshiping in PCA churches and been involved there a little bit, going into the OPC and being handed your little book here that I don't know how you keep track of it without a binder, but you have this little book of the...
And there are no pages intentionally left blank either. So
no. So you're missing out. But yeah, what was your experience going into the OPC, and what is there anything that makes the OPC kind of unique in their approach, whether the directory or just in their approach to worship, that you found different?
Well, just the way you've kind of framed the question, I got to give more background. I was born and raised in the OPC, so this is all I ever knew. And that is actually part of the reason I wrote the book I wrote. I grew up in the Reformed tradition in the Presbyterian context. I was in a Presbyterian church in college, and 10th is known as being a conservative traditional church, so it didn't really look a whole lot different than what I had growing up. But it wasn't until I went to seminary where I started realizing, just through people asking questions, maybe me asking, I think I was in a Sunday school. We were at a United Reformed Church, and again, the worship looked similar. But I asked some question about the Lord's Supper. I'm in seminary, right? And I said something that was very Zwinglian about the supper. And the pastor said, "You don't even believe that. That's your denomination doesn't believe that. It's in your confession. This is in your directory. That's not the view you guys take." And I thought, I don't think I knew that. And then I started to realize, I don't think I've ever thought about worship ever in my life. I just have taken everything for granted, that this is just the way we do it. And I thought, oh, if that's how it is for me, I'm sure there are other people either who have grown up in the Reformed tradition and it's just sort of like fish don't think about water. I just never thought about the way we did things. Or there are people who are coming into the Reformed tradition that are wondering, why do we do it this way? So that's why I started doing it. I got more into studying worship and liturgics there at the start of seminary. And then something I was passionate about coming into ministry. It was the first Sunday school series we did for, 12 weeks or 18 weeks or something. Why do we worship the way we do? And making sure that we actually understand the convictions that we have. I hopefully that kind of answers some of your question, Jared. When I think about the OPC and her approach to worship, I think, what word comes to mind? I would say vanilla, and I say that in the best sense possible. I think this is very standard Reformed fare. I'm doing doctoral work right now through RTS on the Westminster Directory for Worship and working on writing a commentary for that. And this is almost exactly 300 years removed from that. And it's just, it follows the same train of thought, the same trajectory, same tradition. It's worship that's regulated by the Word, directed by the Word, directed to the God of the Word. So nothing really exciting. But then again, you did know you were inviting an OP minister on, so...
Yes. I do think if you read the original directory, it's interesting how helpful it is in that there's a lot of actually like suggestions and advice that's not, you shall do this, you shall not do that. That was one thing that I found really helpful in the OPC's directory is your first couple pages.
Yeah, so
give you a glossary.
When you're talking about the original, you mean the Westminster's directory?
Yes, but
yeah,
I was going to say the OPC
it follows that.
Yeah, the OPC I think helps in that in the very beginning they say if we're using the words shall, will, must.
Yeah, exactly.
That means you have to do that. But then others are either strongly recommended, commended, or permissible by different language, different wordings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, and that's what you get in the original directory is a few things are meant. You have to have a sermon. It has to be based on a text. But sometimes it's giving you advice of how that sermon should go and not to take too much time with this versus that. And so I wonder practically how the study of the directory, whether OPC and its roots back into directory, has helped you. How can the directory be a help to convince PCA people that haven't had a functional directory that a directory is helpful for them?
Well, you have to wait a couple years until the dissertation comes out. But in our directory, let's see, this is under the parts of worship, but it kind of builds off of what you're saying. There's this line, the Lord Jesus Christ has not prescribed a set order for public worship. Rather, he's given his church a large measure of liberty in this matter. So it's kind of this idea of where are there going to be shalls or mays. But I think what that gives me an appreciation for, the Westminster does the same, is that we need, as ministers and as part of the broader church, we need to have love and latitude when we think about what worship can look like. There's not one set way of how it will take expression. So we don't want to disfellowship, whether in actuality or just in practice, the way we think about people or talk about them, those who worship differently than we do, and recognize that there can be latitude. Something that is so helpful about the Westminster and the OP, or a directory in general, is that it provides protection actually through liberty. So what do I mean by that? If it was just staunchly restricting, things need to look this way, that way, I think that would bind people's consciences. And when you think about the original assembly of this group of men coming from all kinds of different backgrounds, right? It's a consensus document. They are compromising with one another, and a directory will do that where it recognizes we don't want to bind the conscience. We want to give as much liberty, as much latitude as there can be, but then still set the markers where they need to be set. When you don't have a directory, you think you're still getting the liberty and the latitude, right? But what you actually find is you also get transgressions, right? People doing things where other churches are saying, well, wait a second, that can't be right. That doesn't seem to fit with our tradition or with the scriptures, whatever. And the response could be, show me where it says I can't do that, right? So I would just say that a directory actually promotes both diversity, liberty, and unity all at the same time. And I think people maybe have an inclination to think it does the opposite, that it stifles diversity, right? But, again, the OP says Jesus has not prescribed a set order. He's just given a large measure of liberty in this matter. Okay, so that's good to know. But now let's talk about what he has prescribed, and let's make sure we're in line with that. And then love one another as we find different expressions of doing those things.
Yeah, I thought I'd give Scott and Ben a chance if you have any thoughts along those lines or any appreciations reading through the OPC's approach on this.
I'm so appreciative. Very appreciative.
I mean, I have appreciated the OPs. There is brevity with the directory. Sometimes when I'm even looking at our non-constitutional directory, it seems to go on. And you have a dense 5 chapters. There's no doubt about it, but it's just 5 chapters. And so it shows the limits. It's a very important thing that we do in our worship to worship God. But how you've structured your directory just communicates brevity. And I think that sort of brevity is something to be appreciated both in your tradition and maybe something we can adopt in ours as we move forward.
Yeah, and the 5 chapters really, in one sense, like only 3 of them I would consider like substantive, because chapter 4 is on how to receive new members, and chapter 5 is on special occasions for worship, which is like 1 page. But when you get into the what and the what of worship, I do appreciate that about our directory. I'm not sure what yours has, but like there is like a really helpful theology of worship in chapter 1, where it talks about like the sacred duty. That's section 1. Section 2 talks about the sacred time of worship, like the Lord's Day, the sacred people, the covenant relationship we have with God. So those things are useful. And then we get into the elements of worship in chapter 2, and sacraments and so forth. So it's even more brief than it might seem at the initial onset.
And yet it has some things that I think would be great for us to have in our directory. One is you actually have a form for adult baptism. The PCA does not have a form for adult baptism. You just have to cobble it together from what's in there.
We baptize adults? What?
Occasionally.
Huh? Man.
If they're coming in, they've never been baptized before, of course. But I've also appreciated some of the suggested prayers they have. You don't have to pray like this, but you can pray something like this. And I actually used the OPC's directory on the Lord's Supper because surprisingly, it was a lot warmer than what the PCA had, because PCA
what do you
has
mean,
like bullet points.
Surprisingly? Come on, what does that mean?
Well, the PCA has bullet points of like, here, talk about this, and this as you're fencing. And then there would be kind of suggest saying this or suggest like this sort of prayer. And I was like, oh, this actually sounds like a human being did this rather than a list.
Yeah, we also have a really good, we have a really good suggested forms and prayers for burials and graveside services too. I was reading that not too long ago, and I thought, oh wow, I didn't know it was that good. I was taken aback myself.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you've had a chance to use the directory, or just what you would have to do with somebody coming into your church that is not that didn't grow up OPC or PCA, that is new to Reformed worship. How is it that you explain to somebody with American sensibilities, somebody with maybe a Baptist non-denom background, and they come in and say, why do you do that? Have you ever been able to use the directory or just Reformed worship principles in general to explain to somebody what's going on?
Yeah, I think there are a couple principles of worship that I want to communicate to people that are integral to the Reformed understanding of worship and show up in the OPC's directory. When we think about principles of worship, the first one I imagine we all think of is the RPW, the Regulative Principle of Worship, which is in the OP's directory. We have, besides it being in our confession and catechism, the section 6 of B. So 1B6, nature of worship. Triune God reveals the way of knowing and worshiping him in his word. The principles of public worship must be derived from the Bible, either as they're expressly set down or good necessary consequence. God may not be worshipped according to human imaginations or inventions, or in any way not prescribed by his word. So we have this regulative principle of worship. I think another thing that's really important is what I call a participatory principle of worship. That was key to the Reformation, was that people would be active and engaged in worship, whereas the Mass was something that they sort of watched and didn't even understand what they were watching.
Which maybe is a lot of American evangelicalism, too. There's a concert that you're watching.
That's what I was just going to say, right, is that is not dead and gone. That is very much alive and well, sadly so, in the evangelical church today, where it's not viewed as something you participate in, but something that is performed for you. Again, in the OP's directory, we have this line that the unity and Catholicity of the covenant people are to be manifest in public worship. Accordingly, the service is to be conducted in a manner that enables and expects all the members of the covenant community, male, female, old, young, rich, poor, educated, uneducated, healthy, infirm, people from every race and nation, to worship together. That's a really important thing to teach people. The hypothetical people you're talking about who come to your church and it's like, why do you guys do the things you do? Why does this look different? Because God wants his people to worship together. God is not we are not passive spectators is the language that's used in terms of worship. And God isn't either. He's very much engaged as well. So you have the regulative principle of worship. You have this participatory principle, which means it's not a concert, by the way. An interesting line, I don't know if you've ever picked up on this, Jared, when you've read through about where we put our instruments in the OPC. Have you ever seen that one? Okay. Because musicians and musical instruments serve the part of worship that is performed by the congregation. I think this is something unique. I've never seen this in another directory. It's music worship that's performed by the congregation. It is fitting that the instruments be positioned with or behind the congregation. So, not that anybody here would ever be in a situation where they're like up front playing guitar or something, but the OP directory would say you should not do that. Now, what's interesting is that's one of the...
Fitting.
What's that?
It also says fitting. It doesn't say shout.
Fitting. It doesn't say shout, right. It is fitting. You're absolutely right. And I would say that's one of the things I've rarely ever seen actually implemented is where, cause, you're kind of limited by whatever space you're given. But it is neat to sometimes you go in a church and you see they have the piano or whatever in the back behind. And it's like, oh, you're taking that seriously.
Yeah. It's good also to have them kind of off to the side. There's not like a show that's going on.
So
you have the person leading and it's here the instruments are off to the side with the congregation or something. And that's it helps you to understand the role of helping, not hurting, which I've preached in a few RP churches. Man, those are the best singers because they can't hide behind the instruments.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, so our current building allows for us to have the piano to the side, which is nice. But at our last building, it was such a narrow sanctuary. It was right up front. Nothing you can do about it. So I want to tell people about the regulative principle. I want to tell them about the participatory principle. And then the last one that I think is so critical for a Reformed understanding of worship is the dialogical principle. And the OPC's directory is really good on this, really strong on this, that worship is a covenantal conversation between God and his people. And so there's chapter 2 is basically all about explaining so people understand what parts of the worship are directed from the people to God and what parts are directed from God to the people, and that generally they should be going back and forth. And so it talks about, that's actually the headings that it uses to separate the parts of worship. It's the part from God to the people is section A of chapter 2, and then section B is the part from the people to God.
Yeah, and that's in our directory, even listed as an element of worship, is listening to the sermon, which I think is interesting to think of. There are elements in which the people are participating. They're not just watching the pastor do something, but they are confessing their faith. They are singing. There's an active listening to the session, which is part of kind of the debate within the PCA. I would say probably the biggest source of controversy for our directory is probably going to be which parts are just done by pastor or minister, which parts are by the people. I don't know
or lay people.
Or lay people, yeah. And I didn't know if that's been an area of controversy within the OPC at all, or if there are different areas in which the directory maybe has been a part of debate or people have debated in the OPC over the directory.
I'm not aware of active or even past debates about that. The directory is pretty clear about who should be reading scripture and preaching, and I think it's been a non-issue.
Yeah. Have there been other areas for OPC debate on the directory, though?
We're not contentious at all. We get along about everything. And, I'm not sure. Probably we might not think about this in terms of a directory for worship, but I think membership vows would be one. And that does show up in chapter 4. Who can take those vows? For example, what about somebody with Baptistic convictions? Can they join an OP church? I do know of debates about that. And I think the majority would say, yeah, come on in.
We won't make an elder, but yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly, because there's a vow for officer that's a little different than the vow for members. But some people would say, well, our 5th membership vow, we think they wouldn't be able to keep in good standing, which is you submit to the discipline of the church in case you're found delinquent in doctrine or life. And hey, you're already found delinquent in doctrine. That is an ongoing debate. I think it's a very small minority that would have an issue with that or would vocalize that issue. But technically speaking, that would fall under the DPW.
Do you have any areas that you think, yours is bound. I don't know if your next update is like 2030 or something like that. But if they were going to do any revising, is there any time that you've thought, I think our directory needs a little bit more clarity on this, or maybe a section on this? If you're going to advise your GA in coming years for revising it, what would you say?
Yeah, it gets back to the vows again, actually. So I just think it's interesting. So we just talked about the membership vows, and there's 5 vows. Do you believe in the triune God, or do you believe in the Word of God is number 1? Do you believe God is triune, that Jesus is, God in the flesh? Do you believe that Jesus is your Savior, Jesus is your Lord is number 4, and 5, will you participate in this church and submit to the elders? So there's like 4 doctrinal ones, and then that 5th one's sort of practical. We don't actually have, promote peace and purity in our member vow, but it's like that idea. But then the vows for presenting a child for baptism is, one of them is, do you promise to teach diligently to this child the principles of our holy Christian faith revealed in the scriptures of the Old New Testaments and summarized in our confession of faith and catechism? So you never have to take a vow that you would submit to or agree to the confession and catechism to become a member. But then in order to have your kid baptized, you do. So to me, there's an inconsistency, and I would just like that to be consistent. And I'm not sure if I want the confession and catechism to be added to the member vow or taken away from the parental vow. But to me, that just is a glaring, inconsistency that I think maybe should be addressed. But we had great guys working on this. This is a revised edition, but Ned Stonehouse was the chairman of the first committee that put this together, and I think these guys know.
Yeah,
the guys who've worked on this know way more than I will. So
he was unavailable for interview, though.
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, if I'd give Scott and Ben a chance to ask anything that they want to before I have just a couple more questions.
Yeah, I think you've probably addressed this to some degree in what we've talked about already, but let me ask it outrightly. You've grown up in the OPC. Have you ever felt oppressed by y'all's directory? Has your creativity been stifled? And it sounds funny, but this is going to be an argument we're going to have at some point in the PCA, right? Is that, we don't want to limit too much, we don't want to push down people, and we don't want to, prescribe too much. What's your sense of that from your experience? I realize what we would say maybe from a logical standpoint, but
yeah. No, that has not been my experience. I've never felt that way. Of course, my sensibilities tend towards more, conservative and traditional button-up hymns, all that stuff. But it is interesting, you walk into a PCA church off the street, you don't know what you're going to get. If you walk in an OP church, you do know what you're going to get. But there's no real reason for that, because there is latitude in our directory, and there are a few out there that will do things a little differently. That might have a screen, or might be singing more contemporary things, or just being a little bit more creative with the order of service. But you just don't see it happen that often. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's just because there aren't as many churches, and therefore the opportunities for variation are less, or something like that. But just to go back to what I said at the beginning. Brilliance of a directory, or a good directory, is that it does give latitude right? And the challenge for, Nate and the others on the committee is to speak really decisively where Scripture speaks decisively. And then not only to remain silent, but to promote flexibility where the Scriptures are silent. To say that we're happy that the true and pure worship of God can take on various expressions. We're not trying to create some sort of homogenized version of Presbyterian worship, but it's got to be worship that's based in the Word, that preaches the Word, prays the Word, sings the Word, sees the Word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a question.
All right, for us.
Yeah. What do you guys think about evening worship?
My sole one of my main responsibilities at my church is I'm the evening preacher.
So you like it?
I'm a fan.
Because you get paid to do it. Okay.
I can say, yeah, I mean, of course I'm a fan. It changed our life as a family. My wife and I, before we had kids, I got a position at a church at a seminary that had evening worship. It was the first time we'd really been plugged into it. It just totally changed our life. The Lord's Day, in many ways, became what it was supposed to be for us as a result of an evening worship service.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Scott?
Yeah, we're hoping to finish up renovations. You might be hearing some stuff in the background on it in our church building that we bought last year. And after the renovations are complete, we're hoping that one of the first things we'll start implementing is an evening service. I don't know if we'll do it every Sunday. I think that's going to be something we implement over time. But I think the goal is to have weekly evening service. I agree with Ben. When I first came in contact with evening worship was when I was an intern at First Church in Lansing, Illinois. And I didn't realize what I was missing until, you have it. And my family has missed it greatly because of the providence of our current situation. We just have not been able to have it. And so I think that's one of the most exciting things that I'm looking forward to in 2026 is that Providence will have both morning and evening services, and the evening part will be inaugural. And so we're excited about that.
Yeah.
Is this just all an attempt to convince me to implement evening worship at our church?
Jared
Whatever
hates
it takes.
evening worship.
Whatever it takes.
Well, I'm generally a fan of evening worship. I do. If I had Ben's situation, we had an assistant pastor, I think it'd be a no-brainer.
I'm an associate pastor. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, an associate.
Yeah, for the record.
There's a big difference in the PCA.
As much as we hate on assistants, I want to make clear,
He was called. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're
going to keep the whole day,
yeah,
there needs to be something else that's there, and either the family is going to have to supply that through their own practices, which I think for some families is difficult, or the church is going to have to help in some ways. And so we do like a once a month prayer service in which we have a time of prayer and invite people back for that. But more would be better.
Yeah. So no, I'm asking because of our conversation on the DPW. That study came out about, or the statistics about PCA churches. You guys have that off the top of your head, what the percentage was?
Much lower than the rest of the
neighborhood. Or something like that.
15%, right? And the OPC is probably the inverted of that, probably, right? Like 85%.
You took all our evening worship churches from us?
Yeah. But I just thought it's interesting. Our directory says it is highly advisable that a congregation assemble for public worship at the beginning and the ending of the Lord's Day. So, highly advisable. Doesn't say it has to be, but it doesn't even say advisable. That term is used elsewhere in the directory. It is advisable that. It's highly advisable. So I'm just curious, if the fact that it's written there is part of the reason why the OP, by and large, observes evening worship, denominationally speaking. And then what does that mean for this committee and then your assembly as you think about the directory? I don't think anybody on the committee actually has a church that has evening worship. They're probably not going to voluntarily say, hey, let's add a thing that says it's highly advisable that we do it, right?
They might,
right? But then
it may have been suggested to them.
Oh yeah, okay, it might have been. But I just wonder. I'm just curious about causation here. Maybe that has nothing to do with why the OP observes it more. And if you put that in a PCA directory, would all of a sudden they start doing it more? Which thing's driving which?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
because I don't know other people's experience, but sometimes if you go through the directory and there's something you want to implement and the directory says it would be good for you to do that, you bring that to your session and you say, hey, look. And so there may be a lot of pastors in sessions that would love, or members of session that would love to do something like that. And if they had their church backing them up on it.
Yeah. They had some ammo there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something I'm curious to see what will come from the committee, among many other things too.
Yeah. I guess that leads to one of my last questions, which was if you were able to talk to the PCA committee on revising the directory to give it advice. Evening worship, is that your list to them?
I am able to talk to the committee, and I do talk to the committee, so I should probably
keep your advice directly to them.
No, so far it has been primarily sending Nate book recommendations. He asked me, hey, what are you using for this? And what is that? And where can I find this article? So right now I've just been basically his research assistant for him.
Oh, that's great. So he actually asked you. I've just sent unsolicited emails to give him advice.
No, I'm not that forward, Jared.
Now you can send him a podcast episode to listen to.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, but they are in good hands. They've got I'm his unofficial lackey, but they have Chad officially as the OP, advisor. So they'll be in good hands. And Chad's my advisor too for the doctoral project I mentioned. So
yeah,
I think that will all be better. We, meaning the committee and myself, in the next few years, having Chad help us think through things about the directory.
He's good on that. Maybe we should talk to him sometime.
Yeah.
Maybe you can arrange that for us. Well, this is a little bit of a side question.
Okay.
But, okay, you've got your book on worship. And then I remember my wife telling me, hey, you should write a book sometime. And in the time of me saying, like, yeah, I should do that, you've come up with like 7 books. So somebody who may dream of publishing a book sometime, or I've just been reading through Thomas Murphy's book on pastoral theology, which is great. And one of the things he suggests, yes, there it is to turn the stuff that you produce.
Go to the presses, right?
Yeah, well,
that's what he
turn
says.
the stuff that you use for your church into material.
Yeah, I think
since
pamphlets and stuff.
How many books have you published? 6, 7? 12. Okay. Any advice to somebody of like how to put into
forthcoming? I think 11 are out there.
Yeah. How do you put into practice Thomas Murphy's advice to take some of the stuff that this is not necessarily about worship. This is just me asking personally, how do I write a book?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. So my intern and I are going through that Murphy, and we got to that section and we talked about that for a long time, if that is even good advice that he was giving, because some people are gifted and wired to do that and some people just aren't. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say that people need to feel like they aren't contributing to the ministry of the church if they don't publish something, or they need to like leave some sort of printed legacy. But that's just always been a part of my passions and interests. I studied creative writing in college. I mean, there was a point in my life where it's like, that would be my ideal career, is to be a novelist. You know what I mean? Like, that's just growing up. I always loved writing. So the Lord's given me an interest and an ability to do it. But
I heard you did some filmmaking too.
Yeah, so my major was filmmaking and my minor was creative writing, but I wanted to be a writer-director, so I just love telling stories, and I mean, that carries into the pulpit, and I never knew that at the time, like, hell, this is actually how God's preparing me to be a preacher, but it's a lot of actually the same interest, but now getting to tell the best story there is every week. It's a great privilege. But one of the things that helps me, I mean, there's not a single book I've written that wasn't initially a sermon series or a small group study guide or something first for my church. So I start thinking, what do I need to study, what do my people need to study, and then it's only after that I think, could this potentially be useful to a broader audience, or somebody might suggest, hey, that was helpful, it'd be nice to see that in another form. There are so many sermon series and various projects I've done that will never be published and just will collect dust on my hard drive. But I manuscript my sermons anyway, so it's 70% done after I've preached it. And not everybody writes sermons that way too, so it can become harder. And
the case for manuscripting.
There you go. If that's your goal, but it shouldn't be. Of course, it shouldn't be anybody's goal to write books. We want to preach Christ and make Him known, and if books come from that, that's good. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful at all in answering your question.
So, Scott, Ben, I've been doing too much of the talking, so any questions that you have before we wrap up?
Scott's about to get asked to go do some, mortaring or something, yeah.
I know there's a lot of noise going on in the background, though. That's kind of like jackhammering, so trying not to ruin the podcast because of it.
Is this they built the
There it
building,
is.
or
There it
you're renovating the building, or what's going on?
Yeah, last year we bought an old engineering firm, and we're like raising the roof and
That's
gutting
awesome.
all the offices to make a sanctuary, and so that's happening right now.
It's exciting. Hey, unto evening worship.
Unto evening
That's
worship.
right. All right. We're good? Cool. As we would all say, this podcast should be over, so we shall bring it to an end. Listeners, thank you for joining us. We are very grateful to our guest. Jonathan, thank you for your time and your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's see. If you're listening to this, be sure that you're subscribed in your podcast app of choice. You should follow us on Twitter and Facebook, or X, I guess is what we call it now. And that's probably a really, really late comment. I think it's been changed forever, but who calls it that?
No one.
What else do we need to know? There are links below where you can support the show, help us keep the lights on around here, and we appreciate that. Other than that, I hope you guys are looking forward to the time we're going to spend in the directory for worship of the PCA BCO. We've got one more episode after this in late December coming out. We're going to talk to some guys from the EPC, and then, Lord willing, come January 2026, we will jump into the next part of the book. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
Adios.
Y'all take care.